Hello and welcome. Being Chief of the Indian Army Staff is a great honor and a big challenge at any point in time. But when your neighborhood is in such deep ferment and when your neighbors are ganging up against you, it compounds the challenges the man in the hot seat needs to deal with. And to add to the geopolitical challenges, the nature of warfare is changing at tremendous speed. Disruptive weapon systems, drone warfare, asymmetric weapons, cyber warfare are changing the very nature of the modern day war. The need to prioritize and modernize is being felt more acutely than ever before. Our guest this morning has had a distinguished career spanning 4 decades in the Indian Army. He was commissioned in the Sikh Light Infantry, commanded a Rashtriya Rifles Battalion, raised an infantry brigade, and led a key prestigious strike corps. He was Western Army Commander, then Vice Chief, before becoming the Chief of the Indian Army Staff. I am a very proud Army brat. The blood of the Indian Army runs deep in my veins, and it gives me immense pleasure as I welcome this morning to the India Today conclave the Chief of the Indian Army Staff, General M.M. Naravane. Can we have a very warm round of applause, please? General Naravane, welcome. I want to start by talking to you about the changing nature of war. We earlier used to see in Hollywood films drones, swarm drones going up, leading an attack. Now, all of that at immense speed seems to be happening in real life, being deployed in real theaters of action. As Chief of the Indian Army Staff, how do you see the nature of warfare change? And can you give to our audience here at the India Today conclave some insights into how the Indian Army is preparing for the changing nature of warfare?
Thank you, Rahul. And at the outset, thank you for having me here in the India Today conclave. It is a great honor, not only for me, but for the Indian Army, to have an opportunity to interact with such a distinguished audience and to share some of our views. Coming on to the changing character of war, there is no doubt that the character of war is changing. Although the nature of war remains constant, and the nature of war is, of course, to impose your will on the enemy. But the manner in which it is done, the character of war, that is what is always in a state of flux and which is always changing. It is not as if technology was not there in the wars of the past. After all, most of the inventions, whether it is radar, sonar, airplanes, the tanks, all of it were technological inventions of their times to deal with the changing character of war. And similarly, as we go ahead, technology is again going to play a very important part in how we prosecute the wars of the future. But for doing that, we have to also study the wars of the past and whatever conflicts are ongoing. You would have noticed that only yesterday there has been another drone strike on an airport in Saudi Arabia. So is that the way of the future? So we have to crystal gaze a little bit and try to figure out for ourselves what will be the contours of any future conflict. And I think that is the bigger challenge, to be able to home on to what the future wars would be like, and in order to deal with them, what is the way we have to go about building our capabilities and capacities. But one thing which is emerging quite clearly is that the wars of the future will be more distant. There will be more standoff weapons, more over-the-horizon strikes, rather than the physical conflicts, the physical engagements that we have been used to in the past. But having said that, I would like to also re-emphasize that we have two unsettled borders, both on our west and on our north. So although it is good to be talking about technology, the nature of these unsettled borders makes it very necessary to also have boots on ground. The physical occupation of territory, to be able to stake our claim to it and to protect the territorial integrity. These necessities aren't going away anywhere. And therefore, as we embrace technology, we will also have to keep this in mind, that we cannot do away with this very important requirement.
So those are two very different challenges. Boots on the ground, an infantry style occupation of physical territory versus over the horizon strikes. And at a time when monetary resources are scarce and the wish list is long, the need to prioritize is very sharply felt. It's always been a big challenge amongst the armed forces themselves, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, within the Army, the different arms and their competing requirements. To some extent, an effort has been made to streamline the prioritization process. How satisfied are you with that? Do you think greater speed and effort needs to be given to try and ensure that we're able to pick the right weapon systems, rising above intra-army or intra-services challenges or priorities to do what is best for India's national defense?
Yes, it is true that we have to prioritize as we go along. The wish list is long, but we continue to carry out a process of analyzing our threat, the threat perceptions, how soon or late they could manifest. And based on that, we keep prioritizing and reprioritizing our requirements. With the standoff in eastern Ladakh as it occurred last year, we realized that we need to do more as far as ISR is required, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So that has been the thrust of our modernization over the last 1 year. Similarly, other weapons and equipment that we thought we might need to prosecute wars in the future, those have got our attention. And that is the way we are looking at modernizing the armed forces and the Indian Army in particular to meet these future challenges.
You spoke of two unsettled borders, General Naravne. Let's start with what's happening across the Greater Himalayas. As Chief of Army Staff, what's your current reading of the state of play along the line of actual control? We've seen some pullbacks, very limited in sectors like Pangong, so in sectors like Hot Spring, but in Depsang, Demchok, the build-up continues. Also, just behind the LAC, a massive build-up has been undertaken by the PLA. Why do you think the Chinese army is amassing in the way that it is across the LAC from Ladakh all the way to Arunachal Pradesh? And our deployment is almost turning the LAC into a line of control like we have with India and Pakistan. Is that the way you believe things are likely to be from here, sir?
I think in one of the recent MEA updates, the MEA spokesperson had very clearly mentioned that whatever has happened along northern borders is because of the massive build-up by the Chinese and the non-adherence to various protocols which had been laid down in the past, which was the reason for the standoff and what all happened subsequently. So that is very clear as to what was the trigger for all that which happened. Yes, it is a matter of concern that the large-scale build-up which had occurred continues to be in place, and to sustain that kind of a build-up, there has been equal amount of infrastructure development on the Chinese side. So it means that they are there to stay. We are keeping a close watch on all these developments, but if they are there to stay, we are there to stay too. And the build-up on our side and the developments on our side, I would say, are as good as what the PLA has done. But what this will result in, especially if they continue to stay there through the second winter, will definitely mean that we will be in a kind of LC situation, though not an active LC as is there on the Western Front, but definitely we will have to keep a close eye on all the troop build-up and deployments to see that they don't get into any misadventure once again.
So if this was a war game at military operations and army headquarters, and if I were to ask you, what's the enemy thinking? What's your best assessment? I know a lot of it you can't reveal in public, but as best as you can, this massive build-up doesn't suit the Indian army, it doesn't necessarily suit the Chinese army. It could be to intimidate, it could be to pressurize, or it could be a massive build-up leading to a military confrontation at some point in time, next summer or the summer later. You build capacities and then you go in. At this moment, from what you know and as best as you can reveal, what do you think the enemy is thinking?
Yeah, I wish I knew. The most difficult thing is to get into your adversary's mind. And this is a question that we have been asking ourselves, not only within the army, but in all the forum when we have been getting together. It has been very difficult to understand why they should have done this, especially when the world was reeling with the COVID pandemic, and considering that they also have certain issues on their eastern seaboard. While all that is going on, to sort of open up one more front is very difficult to understand or fathom what could have been the reasons. But whatever it might have been, I don't think they've been able to achieve any of those aims because of the rapid response done by the Indian Armed Forces.
And that's something which is incredible, because if you speak to the diplomatic corps, if you speak to military attaches who are posted here, most of them felt that the Indian state would be intimidated by the weapon systems, by the rapid speed of deployment, by the infrastructure the PLA had been able to build up. I think history will note that the response of the Indian Army and the will to stand up to a country that thinks it's emerged as the superpower of the world, which thought it could bully its neighbors, is, and I'm sure all of you sitting here would agree, a true testament to the fighting spirit and the will of the Indian Army. And for that, General Naravne, all of us are very grateful for what the Army is doing. For a moment, I want to shift to the other unsettled border, which is Pakistan. And linked to Pakistan is what's happening in Afghanistan, where now you have a nightmare scenario that could potentially play itself out, because the American army has left. They've left behind in Afghanistan very advanced weapon systems, including night visions, which changes the nature of potential infiltration into Jammu and Kashmir. Are you seeing any of that at this moment? New weapon systems coming in? Are you seeing an increase in infiltration? We've been reading about that. And how is the army coping with the changing dynamics of what's happened in Afghanistan and how that impacts Jammu and Kashmir?
Well, in the beginning of the year, in February, we had reached an understanding between the two DGMOs to observe a ceasefire on the LC. This was not a new understanding. There was always a understanding of a ceasefire right from 2003. But over the years, incidents kept happening, and then it was being honored more in the breach than a ceasefire. But after February, for the next, I would say 4 months, right till the end of June, middle of July, the ceasefire has held in totality and as we understand a ceasefire. But from the end of July onwards to September and now beginning of October, these sporadic incidents have again started. I think it is again following the pattern of 2003, where it was started with one odd incident and then rising to as good as not having a ceasefire. And over the last month or so, we again see renewed attempts at infiltration. We have eliminated 2 or 3 such infiltration attempts. In one odd case, the body was even lying on the LC for good 3-4 days because there were no claimants for that body. Apart from the infiltration bids, and there have been 3 incidents of proper ceasefire violation, that is one post firing at the other post, mostly in the area of the Shamshabari range, North Kashmir. So yes, definitely there has been a spurt in activities, but whether they can be directly linked to what is happening or happened in Afghanistan, we really can't say. But what we can say and learn from the past is that when the previous Taliban regime was in power, that was also in the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, that time definitely we had foreign terrorists of Afghan origin in J&K. So there is reason to believe that the same thing might happen once again, that once the situation in Afghanistan stabilizes, then we could see an inflow of these fighters from Afghanistan into J&K, the UT of J&K. But we are prepared for any such eventuality. We have a very strong counter-infiltration grid to stop them at the border. We have a very strong counter-terrorism grid in the hinterland to take care of any such actions. And just as we dealt with them in the early 2000s, we will deal with them now also, should they venture anywhere near us.
There have been some very specific targeted civilian killings in the Kashmir Valley over the last few days. Are you concerned about the potential impact of the Taliban takeover on the psyche of the Kashmiri Muslim and potentially Indian Muslims in the heartland? And how do you hope to deal with that?
Yes, there has been a spurt of these terror-related incidents in the last month and a half. That is a cause for a little bit of concern, especially in the targeting of innocent civilians. The earlier terrorist-related incidents were firing at some CRPF post or road opening party, which is bad in itself, but is still understandable that you're fighting the security forces. But what is not understandable is why they're targeting innocent people who are going about their daily jobs and their livelihoods. And that is what is totally reprehensible and not acceptable at all. But it just goes to show their psyche, that they just want murder and mayhem. They don't want normalcy. They don't want people to lead normal lives. And I think it is just a last-ditch attempt to stay a little relevant in this whole scheme of things. But the people will revolt. And if they say that they're doing all this for the people, then why you're killing your own people who are your support base? So that is, again, as I said, it is just an attempt to spread terror through these acts, which are, as I said, morally totally unacceptable.
So when my father was at the College of Combat, which used to be called the College of Combat back in the day in Mau, there were many war games on the possibility of a two-front war. And I remember in the evenings just overhearing all the officers talk about how this was a bit far-fetched because it's a hone nahi wala hai, they'll never work in tandem. But that was many, many years ago. Now, the possibility, the very real-world possibility of a two-front escalation exists. And it is a big challenge that the Indian Armed Forces and the Indian nation face. How do you, as Army Chief, view the prospect of a two-front war? To what extent are we preparing for it? Is it ever something we can actually prepare for, having both fronts active at the same time? And what is our strategy in trying to deal with such a possibility?
I think, as we all know, that we have two active and unsettled borders, so the possibility of a collusive scenario will always be there. But I would like to take a step back and say that wars are not fought by armies alone. Wars are fought by nations. And I think at a national level, at the political level, at the diplomatic level, all steps will be taken to ensure that we don't come to a situation where we are facing two enemies at the same time. So let us not look at it purely from a military point of view. We have so many other organs of the state which are all working, and we are all working in tandem for the greater good of the country. So I'm sure they will not allow this kind of a situation to happen where we have to face two full-fledged wars on two different borders, widely separated. But even if that be the case, we have our strategies in place. I would not like to delve too much in detail about what those plans are, but we will be able to ensure that the nation's interests are always safeguarded.
So we saw, all of you would have seen recently the reports of how women will now be allowed in the National Defense Academy. I'm sure the boys would be very excited. The cadets would be delighted to have some female company at NDA, but it brings with it its own set of logistical, operational challenges. How are you preparing for women at the NDA? And we've had women in the armed forces for a while now, but not necessarily in forward deployment roles, unlike, say, Israel or even the US armed forces to some extent. Is the Indian Army mentally and physically preparing for a situation where our girls will be sent into combat? I know Preeti is here. There are many others who believe very strongly that women should be allowed not just in administrative and staff postings, but at the very forefronts of war, and many of them are fitter, more raring to go as any of the boys.
At the outset, I would like to say that as the armed forces and the Indian Army in particular, we do not discriminate on any grounds whatsoever, whether it be language, religion, or gender. We have always had a very inclusive policy in this regard. And as far as the question of admitting women or the girl cadets, lady cadets into the NDA is concerned, we have never had any reservations on that. In fact, the various arrangements which are required, the creation of additional squadrons, the creation of additional infrastructure was already in progress. And we were very much on the way to admitting women into the NDA. And I don't think there is any such kind of a culture shock or anything. We are quite used to having women in our midst. We have had women officers in the army for more than 2 decades now. So it is not that we are not capable of dealing with anything like that. And in fact, when I had gone to Bangladesh and visited the Bangladesh Defense Academy, which is the equivalent of our NDA, there they have been having girl cadets for many years already. I really don't know why we lagged behind.
No, but does the entry of women into the National Defense Academy also mean, and I'm only assuming that it will be true, but I want to know from you, that women will also, once they pass out, be deployed, as all gentlemen cadets would, in frontline combat roles as well? Because if you've got out of the NDA and if you've passed out, you're as eligible for actual warfare and actual fighting as any of the male cadets are. Is that the way you see it as well?
See, at the moment we have opened the commission of women in only 10 branches of the Indian Army. All the supporting arms as well as the supporting services, less infantry, armored and mechanized infantry. I think for the foreseeable future that would remain the same, and it will not make any false promises either. But as I said, we will have to see how it goes along. None of our neighboring countries either have opened up their combat arms to women officers, but that could change in the future. 2 of our women officers are now training to be pilots in the Army aviation, and definitely Army aviation is not going to be in the rear areas. Army aviation and those helicopters will be very much flying over the combat zone. So I think that is one step in that direction. But we have to move slowly, and change will happen, but at its own pace.
I think you've spoken in a very measured fashion. You're indicating that, you know, the prospects of change are being welcomed, but you don't want to rush into change, you want to move at a measured pace, which for a system as big as the Indian Army and an institution of that size is possibly the right thing to do. I want to step away from our land borders to look at the larger geostrategic play, including our maritime borders. We've seen recently, sir, an alliance between Australia, the UK, and the United States, a military alliance. And we've got the Quad, which is not a military alliance, it's not even a full-fledged alliance per se, but is being seen by the enemy nation as a counterbalancing force, the coming together of these four countries, Japan, Australia, India, and the United States. What are your thoughts on the Australia-UK-US alliance? And do you see militarily the need for a counterbalancing force, loosely or generally, to take on China?
I think the Quad, we keep saying Quad, but it was actually military, a security dialogue, not a military dialogue, but a quadrilateral security dialogue, a grouping of 4 countries. But I think this is a grouping of 4 like-minded democracies. I would not like to say that it is a military alliance of any sort, but when you speak of security, the first thing which comes to mind is tanks and guns and aircraft and so on. But security is much more than that. Security is also health security. Security is also climate security, environmental security. So I think when the Quad is getting together, it is looking at more such issues which affect the world and our countries in particular. For example, one of the things the Quad is looking at is the production and distribution of vaccines. So that is more on the health security front. So let us not always see any grouping from a military standpoint alone.
So we saw recently drones being recovered from near our borders. We've seen drones being recovered from near airports. We've seen drones being shot down. Drone defense is a big challenge, and many would argue an insurmountable challenge. How do you see this threat being posed by drones being recovered from places where, if those drones are used as military weapons, it would be a nightmare scenario to deal with?
We started off the session by saying that technology is going to play a major part in the wars of the future. And I think in that, drones and counter-drone systems will be a major component. If the tank versus anti-tank battle was the sort of driver for technological innovation in the last century, I think this drone versus counter-drone systems would be what would be the focus of almost all countries in the foreseeable future. We have made considerable progress in this regard. In the last year's or this year's Army Day Parade, you would have seen the swarm drone demo that we had done. That was not just a technological demonstration, but we have moved ahead and operationalized that too on our border areas. Side by side, we are also developing counter-drone systems in which the DRDO is also playing a big role. As I said, we are all in this together. And recently, we have even modified some of our L-70 guns to take on this counter-drone task. So we are well on our way to developing both these capabilities, the drone capabilities as well as the counter-drone capabilities.
General Naravne, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you at the conclave and to hear such sharp insights. And you've been so candid in what you've said. I thought you'd be much more guarded than you have been. You've given some deep strategic insights into the challenges our armed forces face and how you're hoping to gear up militarily, technologically, and in preparing armed forces. And I think the one thing which all the gentlemen cadets would be happiest with, of course, is having girls at the National Defense Academy. It was inconceivable many years ago, but that will happen, and more power to women. And I look forward to the day when thinking evolves to a level where we allow women not just in the rare areas, but also on the very front lines. Can we have a very warm round of applause for General Naravne? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.